Hi, and welcome to the Ministry Network Podcast. I'm your host, James Baird. Today, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Dan Doriani. In this episode, we'll talk with him about the theology of work. The Ministry Network Podcast is sponsored by Westminster Theological Seminary. To learn more about Westminster and their new online programs, visit ministrynetwork.com/degree. Now, let's talk with Dr. Doriani. Dr. Doriani, much of your recent writing has focused on the topic of work. Can you tell us the story behind this new passion of yours?
Yeah. So first of all, it's actually a very old passion. In the book, I point out that I have two grandfathers, as everybody does. One was an opera singer, and they're about as different as you can get, right? So that just amazed me. It amazed me that you can visit my one grandfather's farm and just like, we're getting milk from the cow right now. And he had chickens, and if a chicken stopped laying, we would kill the chicken and eat it like 3 hours later. So that was amazing to me as a child, but also to have a grandfather who traveled all over the world is amazing. So I probably picked this up from my dad to some extent, just an interest in people's occupations. So I know you say it's a new interest. It's new for me to publish on work, but it's actually a very old interest. I probably conducted 400 interviews over the last 20 years of people in their jobs. I stepped it up when I was at Central Presbyterian Church, which is in the business center. So there were a lot of one of the nation's leading universities, Washington University is there, and one of its leading hospitals, Barnes Jewish Hospital, is there. So a lot of people who had very high-end jobs, research jobs, important financial and legal jobs, educators. And so I just interviewed them and then thought, well, I shouldn't just interview them. I should interview other people. And I really wanted to have the discipleship-oriented groups for people in their specialties like the medical field, the law, legal field, education, technology, who are, of course, all there. And for various reasons, I wasn't able to get it off the ground, but it was always in the back of my mind. And lately, I've been able to turn these reflections. And I always preached on work at least once a year, sermon exclusively about work, and sometimes twice a year, and would talk about work a lot in my sermons, because that's where we serve people more than anywhere else, right? Christians have this idea that, I'm serving people if I'm volunteering. Well, yes, but at work, you have the greatest resources, you have the most training, you have the biggest and most diverse teams. You can just get more done at work. You love your neighbors yourself primarily at work, if it's good, honest work. So I felt that because I had a lot of leaders, it was important to help my people understand their work as a vocation, not just a job, and not just a way to make money, but as a way to love your neighbors yourself. So, if you make chairs, you put up buildings, I would tell people, and they would think, I never thought of this. If you make a really good chair, it could last 200 years. You could be giving a good chair, a comfortable chair to people who will be born 5 generations from now. And you're not just loving your neighbor who's right here, you're loving people down the corridor of time. And if you put up a good building, that building can be there easily 150 years and maybe 250 years. So put up a good building and think of the needs of humanity, not just the needs of the moment.
Would you mind unpacking for us some of the unhelpful ways that Christians, especially in America, often think about work?
Yeah, and of course, the most obvious is the sacred-secular split, the idea that I've only got a vocation if I'm a pastor, a missionary, or maybe a teacher at a Christian school. And then, people maybe have a little bit of an easier time thinking if I am an educator, maybe, kindergarten teacher or high school chemistry teacher working with people who are going to go into the sciences, that's a vocation. And medical fields, people often feel it's a vocation as well. But there's this split of jobs that are noble and pleasing to God and those where you just make money. And, what we have to do is ask why that idea persists, why it doesn't desist, even though we tell our people over and over. And we have to recognize that some work actually isn't very sacred. Promoting the lottery is not actually sacred work because lotteries disproportionately prey on the poor. And if you're promoting it as a way to get rich, you're actually lying to people because they're not going to get rich most likely. They're going to just lose money. So creating junk that pens with the name of the organization that break within 10 minutes. You're not making pens, you're making debris. And marketing things that shouldn't be marketed isn't good work. And so you have to label that for people and stop saying all work is noble, all work is important to God. No, some work is a waste of time, and your deep feeling that you're wasting your effort is valid. Get another job. So a lot of the Christian literature is so interested in saying your work matters that it hesitates to say most work matters. But there is work that's illegal that's, if not immoral, it's at least futile. It doesn't get anything done. It doesn't answer the question, where are we going, in a positive way. So that's one way we go wrong. The second way we go wrong is, again, sort of mistaking the sacred secular business. It is valid to say a job and vocation aren't necessarily quite the same. So one of my children and I've had this conversation. She's very talented, very energetic, and didn't like what she was doing, kind of at the bottom of the totem pole in her job, and had a lot of ideas about how to make it better. And she was very frustrated, but now she's paid her dues, and she's a millennial like you. By the age of 29, she was in charge of a little team and trying to, she had 5 people under her and trying to make it work and do better. And so slowly her job has been turning into a vocation. Now, I'm not saying she's going to stay there permanently, but as she wants to change her corner of the world and make a difference. And sometimes you have to enter data, or you have to start in a mailroom and then work up the way toward trust. And you have to help people label that. In every job, you take out the garbage part of the time. And that doesn't feel like a vocation, but you have to take out the garbage in order to be credible, in order to be a member of the team, so that when the time comes, you can do something that does feel like it is indeed vocational activity. And of course, the great problem is that we just try to make money and get so focused on making money and retire as soon as possible, and let our work be evaluated by its financial implications. That is, we're making a lot of money, therefore it's good. And, again, we want to qualify and say, it's good to make money. In a market economy, you have to make money or you go out of business. A wage equality in a firm that's on the edge of bankruptcy is not to help the poorest workers. You actually cost everybody their job. And that has happened on occasion. So you have to make a profit. We have to be realistic about the world. But having said that, once you're making a profit, then it's important to ask, how can I treat the people around me, right, left, and the people who look up to me in the organizational life, whether organizational chart, formal or not, organizationally, they look up to me. And so I have to remember that my job is to do more than just make money. You have to make money, but it's more than making money.
In your writings, you often talk about the reformation of work. Can you help us understand that concept?
Right. So, as Reformed folks, we have as the last element of the Reformation credo, semper reformanda. We're always reforming, right? So who can reform a workplace? Who can make it better? And I use 4 Ps. Forgive me, I don't usually use alliteration, but here you go. The first one is position. You have to have a good idea is not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient to bring change if you have no authority, if nobody's going to listen to you. Now, you can have influence. That is, you might not have formal authority, but people are interested in your counsel because you're insightful. So the position can be formal or informal, but you have to have some position or your insight will go nowhere. And then that position has to be driven by a second P is principle. That is, you have to have a big idea that you think will actually change things for the better. And then the other 2 Ps, and I'm even more apologetic about the third one, is passion, because it's a wildly overused term. But you do have to care. I mean, if you want to change your corner of the world, you have to care enough to invest effort, because there will be resistance, and some of it will be overt. Machiavelli, I love to quote these people when I can. Machiavelli said that anybody who's going to, this is paraphrase, is going to introduce a change will be mildly supported by those who might profit by it, because it's uncertain any change will actually be efficacious. But those who have perceived that they might lose something from it will be fiercely opposed, because it's very easy to see what they'll lose. And what they're losing is the old order that maybe they helped set up that was profitable in some way for them, financially profitable or emotionally profitable. And then, of course, you have to persevere, because people overtly oppose Machiavelli, but they also exercise a quiet opposition. We could call it sabotage. I'm not going to stand up and say I oppose this, but I'll quietly oppose it. So you have to have the 4 Ps, position, principle, passion, and perseverance in order to get things done. Now, what's an example? So the longest interview I had, which occurred over a span of years, actually, was with a surgeon who was in my church. And I talk about him in the book. And he was a cancer surgeon, and he's an ear, nose, throat, sort of from, neck up kind of guy, which then meant that he handled tumors, cancerous tumors that were in the sinuses and behind the nose and behind the eye and around the eye. And when he started, the death rate was 100%. Everybody who got this certain group of cancers died. There were no exceptions. And he's a brilliant surgeon, and he started to try things with full permission. You will die. We're to try this. And so he had to take people's parts of their face off, like in the movies, remove, peel back, take part of their skull off. And, he started saving some lives. And at first, everybody was blinded. And then he kept working and more lives are being saved. The percentage of people being saved is going up. And then he discerned how one set of tumors in particular, how to save one eye. And so people could see. And then as years go by, he's saving more and more lives. And eventually, sometimes he's able to save both eyes and remove the tumor, and the person lives. And so he's just a great surgeon, renowned. He's been flown across the world to operate on heads of state who had tumors. So then as time goes by, he starts watching the post-cancer treatments, which, the radiation, which takes a toll on the human body, and also chemo, which takes a toll on the body. As a Christian, he believes that God puts the powers of healing in the human body. And there's an old saying among Christian doctors, I dressed the wound, God healed it. So my job is, maybe to stitch somebody up who's got a bad cut, but stitching doesn't heal it. It's God-given power. He believes in that, believes in these God-given powers of the body to heal itself. And he started observing how much damage chemo and radiation do, and how high doses of these impair and sometimes permanently destroy functions like salivary glands if you have cancer in your throat. So then your tongue and your mouth are dry the rest of your life. Sometimes kids get these cancers, or young adults, and so they're going to live their entire life with a dry throat, or their sinuses are over-radiated and don't work properly the rest of their life. And so he started to examine whether we could cut back on those additional treatments. And of course, he runs into resistance because the chemo and the radiation people have dedicated themselves to that, and they're saying, well, no, we're preserving life. And he's saying, well, how many lives? Is there a trade-off we can discuss here? If one extra person is saved out of 1,000, but 999 have their salivary glands blasted for the rest of their life, is that worth it? So I'm not going to go down the road. You can imagine that was pretty controversial. But in the end, I'll just say he won. The data came in. In the end, his approach leads to very, very, very low of additional, the term is recrudescence, or return of the cancer. Or none, maybe. And survival rates may be better, or at least the same, because other damage doesn't occur in the body, and it's been tested in other sites throughout America and the world, and it's verified. It's in textbooks now. So he used this position, right? He had a principle, the body heals itself. He had passion for this. He cared about his patients. He loves his patients. And he had to persevere because he was upending the protocols for treatment of cancers. So, that's an extreme case, but there are a lot of people. I have a friend who's a grain mover. He's probably the best grain mover in the world. If he's not the best, he sure is one of the handful of the best. And he's just made it a little bit easier to move grain without waste all over the world. It's not as exciting, but that's important too. And I have another friend who owns a business in the transportation industry, and he's looking into hydrogen cells to move trucks across the country, which basically produce no pollution. And he's starting to use that. So, some are bigger than others, right? And I have now a little organization called the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis, and we disciple people in groups of, sort of 10 to 12. And at the end, you create a project. And it's a project using your position, your expertise in your firm to change the world to make it a little better. One of the interesting things is that several of the people had projects in fields where there's a tendency to make people work 24/7. And they came up with, again, they're leaders. They have the position. They care about this as Christians, right? Because they believe in the Sabbath principle, the principle of rest. And they've persuaded the bosses, look, we need to give people time off, real, true blue time off. These are the benefits you'll gain. Your profitability will go up. Your projects will get done faster and more effectively. And we can treat people better. So probably 4 people have had projects along those lines. And they're not grand, right? But they're good. That's what we're trying to aim for. So yeah, I have a book coming out in about 6 months that will help pastors lead their people through that in discipleship groups. I don't know exactly what the title will be, but it's going to have Dan Doriani and work on it, and it'll be published by P&R. So that'll be out in the fall. And it has exercises and, how you as a pastor can do this with your people and get to know your people better that way.
You also talk about the importance of social reform. Can you help us understand how we as Christians should think about social reform differently than, say, the culture around us?
Yeah, so for me, social reform has to be expertise-based, right? So one of the things that's in the air right now is the bail system, and the fact that if a well-off person, and especially somebody from the majority culture, but especially anybody really who has good resources, can get a lawyer, and if they're arrested, they'll be out within a matter of hours. But if you're poor and you don't have the money to post bail, which is often the case, you wait in jail for your trial, which means, you've been maybe punished for a week or 2 weeks or a month or sometimes a year waiting for your trial. Then you're exonerated and you spend a year in jail. Or people sometimes are released, they committed a crime, and they're released on the basis of time served. They've already been in jail 14 months, and that seems like a pretty good tenure for the crime they committed. So obviously that's unjust. So who's going to change that? Well, it has to be people who have legal expertise, who know, I'm not going to change that. I'm aware of it. I can call for it because I've read about it, but I can't change it. I mean, who's going to change it? It's going to be lawyers and judges and maybe law professors or experts in the history of law, perhaps, but it's basically going to be lawyers and judges. And then, of course, also legislators. So it's got to be expertise-based. To put it differently, who's going to change the environment? It's not entirely terrible to have people shouting you're destroying the environment, but the people who are actually going to change creation care, we would call it, are going to be engineers and inventors who get out there and discern ways to create less pollution and to care for the water and the soil and the air more effectively. And that's, small step by step. We can all maybe buy cars that are more fuel efficient and put in light bulbs that are more energy efficient. Those are small steps, are good steps. The big steps are probably going to fall to people who believe that either God called them or that it's their debt to the human race to try to make things better. In a similar vein, medical reform, which a lot of people are calling for right now, is probably going to have to come from doctors, now a pastor, who notices the monetization of medical care and, the way clients, the word client is replacing the word patient, and the way long interviews are disappearing. You read old literature on diagnostics, it implies that the doctor has time to listen to somebody and ask probing questions for, maybe 20 minutes. And that's just gone. So, okay, we need medical reform, but it's going to be the insider who makes the change. So when I talk about social reform, that's sort of and I'm kind of shying away from that term more and more. I like to just talk about reform in your field. So if you're trying to move grain or move fruits and vegetables, reform your field. I know somebody's trying to reform the field of refrigeration. He has big ideas for that. But, of course, the idea is that when we talk about justice, and, I remember somebody saying to me, you're kind of a justice-y guy. And well, there's so many negative connotations in our culture, social justice warrior and all that. But justice is a Bible term. I mean, the word justice appears so many times. The Bible talks about righteousness so many times. But in the Bible, it's not just do justice, right? Mike, it's do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. And, he says, you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, fine. But you've neglected the weightier matters, which are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So when we talk about justice and social reform, you have to remember that it's not simply justice. It's justice in the Bible that's loving and it's faithful. That is to say, it's enduring. It's not enough to come in and protest something or to call for reform. You have to push it through, because remember, there's sabotage, and people will try to undo your reform if it's not beneficial to them. So you have to keep on going. So it's justice. Social reform is based on expertise. Usually it's corporate. One person by himself or herself is not going to create a wide-ranging change. So it's insight-based, it's expertise-based, it's grounded in biblical wisdom, certainly if you're a Christian, and it's justice and love and mercy and faithfulness.
What counsel would you give pastors who are trying to find the connection between applying the scriptures and the transformation of work?
So I like that question. It's a complex question, but I'll say it this way. If you can find opportunities to ask people about their work, working with pastors in these cohorts, one of the very insightful pastors said, what I find is when I'm with my business leaders or work leaders, they're often leaders in the church. And so I end up asking them questions about how their work as deacons or elders or leaders of women's ministry go. And so I'll ask them quickly about their work, and it'll be 5 minutes, and then it's back to what the church does. So one of the great values of these cohorts is that you spend 12 hours talking to people about their work, and then you find out what their work is actually like, and you hear their projects, and you realize what their work is actually like. So you have to listen. You have to listen at some length. Don't just ask, how's your work going? Oh, great. Oh, bad. I've got this problem with my boss. I resent my boss so much. No, you have to go deeper with your people and ask them, what are you actually doing? What's the nature of your work? And as you listen deeply to people, and of course, read literature about work as well, magazine articles and books about work, you know enough to make applications that actually make sense. And when I would speak on if I was going to talk about law or medicine or education, I recruited people in my church to say, look, I'm going to say this. I want to address, can you tell me if I'm being an idiot here? If I stated this in a way that shows gross naivete and I'm going to lose my credibility as well as do no good because it's so naive. And so they would, thank you, friends. They'd give me my feedback, the feedback I wanted. So, well, you should say it. Thank you. That's a good point. You need to say it a little bit differently. But I would just say in general, remember that work is probably for most of us where we spend the most time and effort. And pastors, please, don't ever stop talking about Jesus and about your personal faith and loving your wife and loving your kids and loving your friends. But also talk to people about serving God at work, which does not mean simply showing up and working hard. It doesn't mean simply being ready to share your faith. That's true. You should. But there's more than showing up and working hard, more than sharing your faith, more than helping your friend in need. It's also consistently asking the question, am I loving my neighbor? How can I love my neighbor better through the work I do? Whether I'm in a position of leadership, formal, informal, or I'm a follower, relatively low in the organization, serving people day by day, how can I do this? If you just keep asking the question, how can I help my people with the paid and unpaid, recompense and not recompense? Volunteer work is often very hard work and very important work. If you just keep asking that question, I think you'll be fine.
Dr. Doriani, thank you so much for joining us here today on Ministry Network.
Glad to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Join us next time as we talk with Dr. D.A. Carson. In the meantime, you can visit ministrynetwork.com/degree to learn more about the new online offerings available at Westminster Theological Seminary.